wish I offered none, so compromised at all.
Awesome.
Is anybody?
Welcome, Mr. King.
Because it's not coming through there very well.
I didn't turn it on, sorry.
Ah,
Let's let Mr. King get situated.
Yes.
Staff update. Do we have any staff updates?
I don't have too much for you today. We haven't had new ordinances get passed since the last one where we talked about the housing element. So honestly, a lot of staff's effort right now is just focused on implementing the housing element update and the rezones. So that's the latest.
Okay. Well, Shannon, this thing that's coming up today, isn't that part of that? Or is that something?
Oh, sorry.
No?
Not directly, no.
Directly because it came from the state?
Yeah, so what Karina's going to be sharing with us is related to Senate Bill 9, which I think has been in effect for about 2, maybe closing in on 3 years. And it's the bill that allows some types of like urban lot splits ministerially, and then some degree of development with a ministerial permit. So no land use permit for certain types of residences, depending on what the applicant seeks to do. And long range planning's been developing an ordinance that implements state law, which I think is she's going to be focusing, I think, on the development standards that would be applied to new housing units proposed under that bill, but I'll let her get into the details.
Okay, thank you, Shannon. All right, then I guess we go on to today's agenda. And that, hold on, where's the beginning of that thing? In that one, isn't it?
So it's on the,
I don't have one that has the,
It's up on the screen.
oh. Objective Design Standards, Senate Bill 19 and Telcom.
Hi, good morning. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. My name is Karina Venegas Martin. As Shannon mentioned, I'm with the Long Range Planning Division, and she gave a great introduction into what I'm going to be presenting today. But I'm going to be focusing, as she mentioned, on the proposed objective design standards for Senate Bill 9, as well as the county's telecom ordinance. And essentially, these proposed objective standards are intended to strike a balance between state-mandated types of development, which Senate Bill 9, and also trying to preserve community and neighborhood character. So staff is looking for feedback or any suggested modifications to any of these standards, and we can discuss those at the end of the presentation.
I don't even know what that was. That was weird.
Yeah. Can you do the last part of that over? Because we had a short commercial intervention.
No worries. Yes, of course. All right. Well, I'll just kind of repeat what I was saying. So these proposed objective design standards are our goal is, and it's intended to strike a balance between, these state mandated types of development, such as like ADUs, while also preserving community and neighborhood character. So with these slides, staff is looking for feedback or suggested modifications to any of these standards, and we can discuss those at the end of the presentation.
Have any of these been applied yet?
Not yet. These haven't been adopted. So these are all proposed. There are some standards that are mixed in that are, and I'll mention those, but those are coming from the state. Those are state mandated standards. So I'm going to just give a brief introduction and overview of each project. So Government Code Section 65851.21 and 66411.7, Senate Bill 9, which became effective on January 1st of 2022. And as Shannon mentioned, it streamlines the process for a homeowner to construct up to 2 primary dwelling units and subdivide an existing single-family lot. And key provisions of the law allow a local agency to apply objective development standards as long as they would not preclude the construction of up to 2 primary dwelling units of at least 800 square feet. And so a similar effort did occur last year with the multifamily objective design standards, which also resulted from state law, and they were drafted and adopted with input from the BAR. So for Senate Bill 9, we used some of those same standards, but what we did was appropriately scaled them down so that they would apply to single-family type of development. Now with telecom, under the FCC's 2018 small cell order, local jurisdictions may exercise local oversight of issues relating to aesthetics, undergrounding, and minimum spacing requirements of small wireless facilities, provided that those requirements are reasonable and that they're technically feasible and no more burdensome than those applied to other types of infrastructure development. And I'll just note that staff did follow a similar approach that the city of Santa Barbara took when they were developing their objective design standards. Next slide, please. So Senate Bill 9 allows up to 2 attached or detached primary units in a single family zone, the subdivision of a parcel in a single family zone into 2 parcels or both. And Senate Bill 9 facilitates the creation of up to 4 housing units in the law area that is typically used for 1 single family home. Projects under SB 9 must be considered ministerially without discretionary review or hearing, which means that these projects would not be reviewed by the BAR. And listed on this slide are the single-family residential zones that could qualify or would qualify, but the project would need to be a legal parcel located wholly within an urbanized area or an urban cluster as designated by the U.S. Census. Also, ADUs can be combined with the primary units, but they would count towards the total maximum unit amount. Next slide. And so as you can see from the image on this slide, there are various configurations that could occur. So for example, if a lot split occurs, jurisdictions must allow 2 units on each resulting lot. So that could include a primary, an ADU, or a junior ADU. And those all count towards the 2-unit limit. If no lot split occurs, then the lot is eligible to have up to 4 units. Again, that could look like 2 primary units, ADUs, or junior ADUs. Next slide. So here's an overview of the standards that I'm going to be going over more in detail. And again, these standards cannot physically preclude the development of up to 2 primary units of at least 800 square feet each. And similar to ADUs, state law dictates a minimum of 4-foot side and rear setbacks. But these units would still be subject to standard front setbacks. And the standards that I have marked with a blue asterisk were taken from the multi-unit project and scaled to apply to single-family type of development. Next slide. Now for the maximum unit size allowed, staff proposes to use a 0.2 floor area ratio approach that allows a minimum of 800 square feet, which is state law, and a maximum unit size of 2,000 square feet. So on the left-hand side of this table, we indicated a lot area range, and then we provided a maximum unit size using the 0.2 FAR on the right. So for projects with 2 primary units, whether that be existing or proposed, they would be subject to a maximum of 0.4 FAR. Next slide. Additionally, we propose to allow up to 500 square feet for an attached garage or carport with standard setbacks and same architectural design, as well as included an allowance of 20% of the floor area for the new unit to have an attached architectural feature, such as a covered patio, porch, deck. And this is an approach that we actually took from the ADU ordinance and carried over. Next slide. For height limits, staff tried to find an appropriate height limit that would still provide for reasonable development while protecting neighborhood compatibility. So we propose that new attached dwelling units not exceed the height of any existing primary dwelling unit on the parcel, or 25 feet and a maximum of 2 stories, whichever is greater. For new detached dwelling units, they shall not exceed a height of 25 feet and a maximum of 2 stories. And I'll note that all new dwellings, whether they be attached or detached, would still need to comply with all other applicable height regulations such as ridgeline, hillside guidelines, and height limits. And we also have one question to consider, which would be to continue to allow for an additional 3 feet for pitched roofs for the height limits. Next slide.
You have a question?
Could you repeat the last sentence, please? The additional 3 feet?
Yeah, so we included for feedback what we would like to continue to allow for an additional 3 feet for pitched roofs to be included in the height limits kind of as part of the standard.
So just contextually, Bobby, she's talking about the ordinance where if you're hillside ridgeline, then you have a maximum. There's a height exceptions where you can add an additional 3 feet if you have a certain pitch of roof. And like you guys see it most when it's hillside ridgeline and like there's a max height of 16 feet, but they can do 19 if they do a certain pitch of roof. And that it's just carrying it over to this type of unit too.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shannon.
I have a quick question on the lot size. So there are minimum size standards in the county currently. Would they just waive those off and you can split a 5,000 square foot lot into 2 full lots and build 2 houses on that?
So if the project is under or subject to SB 9, yes, they would be able to split a lot if it meets all of the other requirements that are noted in the state legislation. But the lot would need to be essentially equally split or a minimum of 60-40. And then the new unit could have a minimum or size be 800 square feet, whatever that they could fit on the lot based off of the 4-foot side and rear setbacks. And then also they would still need to comply with front setbacks as well.
That's what it currently is.
So you could have.
And just for contextually, we have been processing these types of lot splits. We may be done, we have a number in, but maybe we've approved 6 to 10. We haven't gotten all that many applications in, but we have been processing these for 2.5 years, those types of lot splits.
Is there a minimum size? Because at 60-40, if you had a tiny lot, you could end up with a tiny lot.
So the newly created parcels must be at least 1,200 square feet.
100.
Unless a local jurisdiction were to adopt a smaller lot size, but that's what the state noted in the legislation.
And that's except without the garage, which is additional square footage.
Correct. Yes, we would allow for an additional square footage for a garage or carport, as well as an architectural feature to be added.
When you have decks and so forth, you were talking about, are those only covered decks?
No, they can be uncovered as well.
So all at flat work, we're requiring, so that would just be flat work is also included?
Flat work would not count towards the limit. It would be something that would be attached, such as like an attached deck, could be covered, uncovered. But if it were flat work, that wouldn't necessarily be that part of that 20% allowance.
So as to understand this completely, the minimum lot size in the county is currently 4,000 square feet, correct?
I believe so, yes. Shannon, you can correct me.
So you could split that into 2 lots of say 2,000 square feet and then build a unit and an ADU on each one.
We haven't seen anyone propose something that's smaller than 5,000, but in theory, I mean, the smallest lot size is probably an SLP, and I think it's like 3,000, but I mean, those are just hypotheticals and we haven't seen that.
About what's the advantage of having a lot split if you can get the same number of units on a bigger lot?
You can sell the second lot, you know?
So when you have a single lot, does each one of the primary units have to have its own water meter and that sort of thing?
Yeah. Of course.
Yes. So if they're primary dwelling units, yes. and so one of the things we do if there's a lot split is we get proof of service for the new units, or the new potential units. And then if we get an application in for these SB9 dwelling units, they also have to supply documentation from the service provider.
ADUs don't have to have their own water meter, correct?
Correct.
And did I hear you say that if somebody has an empty lot and wants to put two houses on it, that neither one of them comes to us?
It all depends on how people want to propose their project. So, you know, they could go the normal LUP route and get bigger houses, not have to comply with these new requirements, or they can, you know, comply with the requirements that Karina's discussing. And, you know, they're subject to smaller unit sizes and such, and they have to meet extra requirements. But the flip side of that is that they're processed ministerially, so they don't need a land use permit or,
So if
or
somebody
review.
had a lot and they wanted to build two houses on it, the setbacks are now 4.5 feet?
They would be 4 feet and they would still be subject to standard front setbacks.
But side yards and back and rear setbacks are only going to be 4 feet?
For an SB9 project, yes, they would be subject to 4-foot side and rear setbacks.
So somebody could build two primary houses on a lot and have a 4-foot setback in the back.
Yes, under Senate Bill 9, yes, yeah.
And neither one would ever come to us to be reviewed.
As long as they comply with the standards that are noted in state law, those that are mandated, and then the ones that we adopt as part of the ordinance, they would not need BAR review.
Do they have to have parking? I don't remember parking requirements.
So parking is, we didn't include on this presentation because it wasn't part of design, but parking is
Okay.
1 space per unit. Unless, similar to ADUs, unless there is a high quality transit area, like for example, busing transit system, then no parking is required.
So if they're near a bus stop, they don't have to provide any parking at all.
Correct.
What about if you're basically doubling or more the amount of water and sewage in a single family neighborhood? At some point, it's going to overwhelm the system. Does this limit you at all? Is that even considered as part of this?
I mean,
Oh,
oh, go ahead, Karina. Sorry. I mean, I will say that I think we've only gotten 4 applications in 2.5 years for units pursuant to this, this bill. I mean, there was a lot of, I don't know if you might all recall, 2.5 years ago when there was a lot of press about this bill, and that was a concern that was brought up, but across the state, I haven't seen it being all that widely used, honestly. And part of what long range planning is doing is implementing requirements to essentially like limit the unit size, at least if someone does go in this direction. But you know, with the lot split available, like if you had a single family home and then an ADU, it really isn't probably more widespread on the ADU bill being utilized than this one. And essentially they net the same result, other than you have the potential to subdivide as well.
So you could build 2 houses with no garage. Correct?
That is correct. If it is a project under Senate Bill 9.
And there was an FAU. Is there any landscaping requirements with this?
There is some landscaping requirements that we are including as part of like privacy standards. There's also standards that we noted, and they're not in the presentation, but to comply with WELO as well as replacement. So if there's landscaping or trees that are removed as part of the project, then there are standards for replacement of those trees.
There's no percentage of hardscape versus landscape in this bill at all, right? Or in our ordinance?
No, but
Standards?
we did include some private open space, which I'll get into in the presentation. So it's about a 300 square foot area of private open space that needs to be dedicated for the unit and directly accessible.
So it's possible that they could pave the entire lot. I mean, there's nothing in the, except for the screening for certain heights and that sort of stuff that I see.
Correct.
Well, Jimmy, you have
Hey, Karina, well, this is Alex Tuttle. Sorry to interject. SBAR had a similar comment, and they actually recommended that there be a minimum percentage of landscaping, like between ground cover and shrubs and trees of, I think they proposed something around 25% of the lot was their recommendation for us to consider.
There's a lot.
25% sounds like a lot. You have a 4-foot minimum setback. That probably should be hardscaped, but there's a better question too. What happens with the runoff water, discharge water? We've got new state laws that we have to retain on site, the runoff water. What do they do with that on these new developments, new developed units on existing lots?
Yeah, they would have to comply with whatever stormwater requirements are applicable to the amount of impervious surfaces proposed.
So
So
that
they
looks
would
to
not
me
be
like,
exempted from that.
looks to me like most of the city lots basically don't have enough room for people to add an ADU onto them or in second dwelling, let alone split the lots. This is it's a lot of bill for not too many places that it could actually work. And then a place that it could actually work would be a lot that was much larger that somebody could split. There used to be a lot of lots in Santa Maria that were zoned R2. They were longer and skinnier, maybe 50 feet wide by 100 plus feet deep. And they were only using the front third of them. And now they can build a house on the back of them, but they were already zoned R2. Is that kind of what they're trying to do? I don't understand all of the reasoning behind the whole bill. What's the final outcome? If you're only getting 4 to 6 proposals in 2.5 years, looks like a lot of effort for not much gain.
Well, maybe it's just not that known yet.
As soon as it gets known, it's gonna populate.
I would say that it's probably an easier path to construct an ADU than to go the SB9 route. So I think we will continue to see more people go the ADU route even once this is adopted.
That's what it looks like to me too. You've already got the ADU bill, the law in place so that they can build an ADU. I just trying to figure this thing out, and it's so limited in scope. It just doesn't even make sense why they're proposing such a thing. But
to answer your question, I mean, it does essentially convert all single zoned lots into R2 more. That's generally the effect. The applicability or the practicality of it for a lot of lots probably doesn't make a lot of sense. But
could I ask a question about building heights within 4 feet of the property line? That can be 25 feet.
As currently proposed,
Yeah.
it could be 25 feet. Now, if you have thoughts or suggestions on.
Well, I do. Like for instance, in San Luis Obispo, they have various setbacks depending upon the height. And I don't remember off the top, I did it years and years ago, but like at 10 feet, it's 0 to 10 is one setback. At 10 to 15, it's another setback. So it makes a pyramid in the envelope, which would seem to me to be a lot better than having 25-foot walls, potentially 4 feet from some poor guy's lot.
A follow-up portion of that question is what happens on 0 lot lines?
I'm not sure that we have any zones in which this would apply where the lot line, where the setback is 0, because it only applies in certain residential zones. So,
So Shannon, or what would happen? Because typically now garages aren't considered part of the ADU, so they have to meet the current setback requirement, which is typically like say 10 feet.
Yeah.
But the ADU only has to meet, or this new proposed development only has to meet a 4-foot setback. So, and in some cases, they're proposing a single parking stall, which maybe would be in a garage. Would still be required to meet the 10-foot, or would that also be waived off to 4 feet?
No, so the garage or carport would be subject to standard setbacks.
Wow.
So a small rectangular lot that can have 2 residences and 2 ADUs, each of their residences, which can have an attached garage with a lot that's ostensibly less than 50 feet wide. How do you get back to the rear parking lot, the rear area to park? And is anybody considering the fact that a house and an ADU times 2 with the number of people who are living there, all of whom are going to have a car, and where are they supposed to park? And what impact is that going to have on a neighborhood where you have limited street access to parking, and the fact that nobody uses their garage to park their cars anymore? And I guess I just want to be really clear. It seems to me that way back when we first started this conversation, it was pointed out that in any situation here, N-Bar or any of the bars is not going to have any architectural oversight. Is that correct?
For these type of Senate Bill 9 projects, yes. But as Shannon also mentioned, if someone wants to go a different route, whether making the unit larger or adding some things that maybe they don't or can't comply with, then they can go to the BAR.
But they're not required to.
If they don't meet the Senate Bill 9 standards, then they would be required to go to BAR. But if they do meet them, then they are not required.
Thank you.
Shannon, the 25-foot height is from the county, not from the state, right?
I'm gonna defer that to Karina. She's more familiar with
Okay.
that.
So the 25 feet is what we're proposing. It's not from the state. The state does not set any limitation for height. So we have the ability to set that.
I would like to have you guys look at just a pyramid kind of an idea where there's setbacks depending upon the height. Because it's going to maybe make the neighborhoods a little more palatable. Just to think about it.
Okay. Yes, that's great feedback. Thank you.
Karina, when C-Bar talked about landscape, was that a focused area of landscape? Because a 4-foot setback's a walkway. There's no trees and no shrubs that you can plant in there. So it's worthless as a landscape consideration. So is there a minimum area that where you can actually put a tree or have a lawn for a kid to play on, or a vegetable garden or anything like that?
I don't believe we set or went that far into detail. Alex, you can jump in. I don't recall any specific language or standard that they were proposing as far as something like that.
One other kind of
But-
general thing, it would be beneficial for me, I don't know other guys, but to have the actual language that you're proposing rather than a presentation thing like we're seeing now, but to see what language you're trying to use to figure out if there's a better way to say it, or I can poke holes in it and we can patch the holes up or whatever. Is that available?
Yeah, so in the PowerPoint presentation that was shared with you, in the notes of the PowerPoint itself, it has the exact language that we're proposing. I know with these slides, we tried to minimize text, so it doesn't have the full standard itself. It's more of a bullet version. So that can be re-provided to you if it wasn't already.
Yeah,
But the
just put them in our package or whatever and it'd be helpful.
I will say
Yes.
the final, the final draft ordinance is still in draft form, so.
That's why I
you know,
want to see it rather than
Yeah.
finished.
Next step after we get through the BAR reviews, we're going around to each of the BARs, is to bring it forward to the planning commission and then on up to the board. So I think what our expectation is, after you all are the last of our 4 BAR meetings, so we'll be consolidating all the input we've received and probably making some changes here and there. So what you see on the PowerPoint is probably not going to be what ends up getting submitted to the planning commission.
Also, in your accepted materials that I saw when I was looking at it, it's like you listed every material available. Is there something you're trying to exclude?
Are you talking about slide
Yeah,
9?
wood, brick, stucco, plaster, every conceivable exteriors listed. I just wondered why it was
Why would
why it
you
was
list
there.
them?
And if
Yeah,
there was something that wasn't
let's
there
see.
that we were not, are you trying to exclude anything?
So we did provide some exclusions, and we were trying to get feedback from the BARs on types of material and also kind of language and how we should write this specific standard, excuse me. So we can get into that a little bit later after we finish height limits.
So quick question, if a property owner is proposing to subdivide his lot into two smaller lots, do they have to have street frontage?
No, I don't believe that's a specific requirement that the state has mandated. We may have discretion on that.
They don't need street
A
frontage,
flag
but they do need to comply with fire department access requirements.
Well, if there's no vehicle parking requirement, what access are you referring to, pedestrian?
Well, pedestrian or like hose length, be able to get like a gurney basically, or be able to fight a fire with hose length and whatnot. So
Isn't that a couple hundred feet?
I don't know.
It's 150 feet.
150.
That's the standard, but is that getting waived too, or?
no,
Okay. So you're gonna measure that from the nearest fire hydrant and then perpendicular from the lot in the back?
no, it's measured from wherever the fire engine can
Or they park the pumper.
park.
Okay.
All right. Can we jump to the next slide and then we can jump into building design? Great. So for building design, so for additions and new attached units, we propose that they be designed and constructed to match architectural style, colors, exterior building materials, and finishes. This would include siding, windows, doors, roofing, so on.
Oh, the additions, okay.
And then for all sides of the buildings, we propose that they shall be articulated with common details, materials, and elements. And also for building facades that are greater than 30 feet in length, they shall include architectural elements such as a front porch, a balcony, an upper story setback, projections, recessions, things similar. Next slide. We're proposing that they incorporate recessed door and window openings and a minimum of 6 inches for garage doors. All entrances shall have either a projected sheltering element or be recessed from the main facade. The projection or recess shall have a minimum depth of 24 inches. For windows, they shall be either recessed at least 3 inches from the plane of the surrounding exterior wall or shall have a trim or windowsill at least 1/2 inch in depth. Next slide. And then this is the standard you were referring to with all the materials. So the exterior of the primary wall, we're proposing that they can include materials such as wood, composite wood, stone veneer. As you see from the list, it is very long. So if there's anything in here, please feel free to provide feedback. But we're proposing that exposed plywood or glass curtain walls be prohibited. The building must include at least 2 paint colors, one for the main wall color and another for architectural trim pieces, such as siding material. For window frame materials and colors, they shall be used on all elevations.
Do you mean
And
window trim materials?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Did you mean window trim detail materials,
Yes.
not frame?
It can include frame materials and also trim.
Okay.
So you can,
And if that's language you would like us to add as feedback, we can include.
Be consistent on all elevations would be better, yes, to frame and trim materials and colors.
Okay, we'll consider adding that in. And then for transitions between colors or materials, they shall occur at inside corners of intersecting walls or architectural features. And before I jump to the next slide, do we have any feedback or any comments on this?
Well.
I have a
person.
Can I ask a question? Does this go before HCD for approval before you guys write it up into code?
No, this does not go to HCD prior to adoption.
Thank you.
Next slide. So for garages, they shall feature at least windows, panel door surface, 2 different colors or alternative materials and finishes or
What do you mean by
treatments.
2 different colors? The garage door needs to be multicolored?
So there's different options that you can do. You can at least feature at least a windows, a panel door surface. You can propose to do 2 different colors for your garage, whether that be a specific trim around the windows and then the main color of the garage be another, or using other types of finishes and treatments. So there's flexibility on what can be used for the garage. For sloped roofs, we're proposing at least 2 forms, whether that could be primary and secondary. For shiny roofing and siding materials or glossy metallic finish, those would be prohibited. And then we'd propose a light reflective value percentage that shall be below 0.84 with a matte finish. For garage conversions, they shall replace the garage door opening with exterior wall coverings or residential windows and doors to match the existing exterior garage or residence.
Are we
Next
going to
slide.
pause to talk about the garage conversion situation here?
Sure, we can take
I
some
mean,
questions.
I'm curious with the increase of density that's so extreme without reason, as far as I'm concerned. Now we're also looking at allowing people to convert garages as long as they change the front door, the door and the windows, increasing square footage and potential density use of the property again. Why would garage conversions not be prohibited?
So we already allow that through ADUs, for example. So this is just as a standard that's specific for design if someone were to do that type of development.
These are much smaller lots that you're talking about here than a typical ADU, which is being installed in a much larger lot and not with 2 residences and 2 ADUs, all of which with at least 2 garages.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's a 1-car or a 2-car garage, that still increases the density of the square footage.
Mm-hmm.
This is just to clarify, this is like converting your garage to create that second unit.
Has any consideration been given to perhaps only allowing carports instead of garages, which can be converted, and a carport area, which could actually be used to house a car rather than to store excess material, as most people do these days? I mean, somehow there's got to be some attention paid to what happens with street parking, with the way people actually live in these homes. I mean, I'm sorry to be upset, and I know it's not your fault. I'm just telling you from a perspective that we sit at here. You're looking at cramming so much square footage and so many people on these tiny lots that is almost bordering on inhuman, and then allowing a garage conversion. I mean, it's literally right there. Of course you can convert your garage. It's not even conditional. And sorry for the rant.
Under the Senate bill, is the garage conversion only for ADUs?
No, it could be
Because
so
otherwise, it wouldn't apply to the Senate bill, right?
So in the Senate bill, it does not mandate that you have to require a garage conversion or that you can't do a garage conversion. We have discretion over that. We already allow that for ADUs.
Right.
But with the non-lot split, so I'll just clarify. If you do no lot split, you get a maximum of 4 units per lot. If you do the lot split, you get a maximum of 2 units. So if there's a primary and an ADU, that's a max of 2 if you were to lot split per lot. So I just want to clarify that if someone were to convert their garage, it would most likely be for either a smaller unit or they would be going the route of an ADU along with their primary unit.
But those are allowed already with outside of the, no, they're not.
You can convert your garage, even before the ADU ordinance, you could convert your garage into habitable space as long as you could still meet the parking requirements. So it's something we've allowed consistently over time. I think Karina is trying to emphasize that it would just be one way in which people could achieve the number of units that they're allowed under state law. And it's better for the county to have some sort of requirement, so they can't just keep the garage door there than leaving it open-ended and not getting any design change as a result. So this is what Karina's proposing. Is right now people can do this anyways, and they're not subject to any of these design standards. So we're trying to add design standards in to at least get a better result.
Yeah, I think Shannon, that originally before the ADU ordinance came about, you could convert your garage as an addition to your house, but not as a separate unit. And you still had to meet, of course, the relatively minimum parking requirement for the residential. It wasn't, I don't believe it was a covered requirement in the county for most lots. Whereas in many of the cities, they do have a covered requirement. But now with the ADU ordinance, you can convert your garage to an ADU, but you don't have to provide additional parking for that, for any ADU in general. But my question on what are you trying to accomplish with the sloped roof notation there? With a primary and a secondary, can you define what you're saying? Is that like both sides of a gable, or what exactly does that mean?
I think it's just for more interest.
Yeah, so most roofs,
The gable roof?
you like a gable roof, you might have maybe a secondary component, maybe that covers the rear entrance or front entrance, or maybe you'll have a hip roof attached to a gable roof as just architectural interest, just so it's not a single roof form throughout the entire structure.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Can we jump to the next slide, please? So for privacy standards, we're proposing to implement privacy standards for primary dwelling units that are either 2 stories tall or greater than 16 feet in building height. So for example, any upper story unenclosed landings, decks, or balconies that would be greater than 20 square feet that face or overlook an adjoining property, they shall be located a minimum of 10 feet from the side and rear lot lines and interior lot lines, unless landscape screening with a 6-foot minimum height is provided along the perimeter areas visible from the landing, deck, or balcony. And I'll just note that we did receive some feedback about that 6-foot minimum height to increase that. So we're also open to any suggestions on that standard as well.
Is the 10 feet from the side, is that the deck or the building setback?
And that would be the deck.
So the deck has to be 10 feet away. Okay.
Yes, it's 10 feet from the side and rear lot lines, and as well interior lot lines. So for upper story windows located within 15 feet of a side or rear lot line and face or overlook an adjoining property, they shall be installed a minimum of 48 inches above finished floor to help protect privacy. And that's another standard that we did receive some feedback on previously from, I believe, SBAR, to reduce that to 42 inches. So if there's any additional feedback you guys have, we are open to that.
Why would anybody want to reduce it?
Or
Window exiting.
window
fire,
exiting out of a bedroom, for instance.
the code requirement.
I'd leave it at 48 so that you couldn't meet the code requirements and you couldn't have this stupid thing so close to the
6 feet.
Exactly. And the 6-foot high, you're already, if you have a deck that's 8-foot ceiling and 10-foot high to or 9 feet high to the deck, and you stand up another 5 feet, you're already at 14 feet high. What's 6 feet going to do 4 feet away?
Mhm.
You're going to have to look down to try and see that. How's that screening? Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, that's the same
It's
feedback.
just like
we
some
got
of the
from
verbiage
NVIDIA.
is so bad. I want to be honest, some of the verbiage
Well,
is
you don't
bad
need
that
to
it
be,
doesn't make,
you don't
it
need
doesn't
to
make
be
any
rude about it.
sense. If
but
you're
you-
going to create an ordinance, make the verbiage proper.
Sure.
Except just like the roof deal where there's two elements, define the elements. I mean, otherwise, why have an ordinance? Say, hey, you guys can go do whatever you want to do and nobody's going to check you. I mean, you gotta have some definition. I'm not really sure exactly what the whole point of SB 9 is yet, but I'm sure that somebody with money somewhere is pushing it for some reason. We'll find out sooner or later. But if we're going to go through this motion, then you have to at least take the advice you're given and adjust the verbiage to something that somebody can interpret tomorrow and not just hear it today and say, hey, hold on, I don't know what that means.
Well, and that's the whole reason
verbiage
that
has
we're
to be
going through this
has to be
exercise
legible.
of going to all 4 BARs. So if you have suggested language, we're happy to take that into consideration.
I do have a question about what's intended with the 6-foot landscaping. Is that on the ground at the property line?
Yeah, it's intended to just provide for additional screening for privacy. But we have received feedback that the 6-foot minimum is a bit too short. So we're open to any suggestions and ways to improve that. Specific to
Is it to
privacy.
it's to screen the neighbor, so the neighbor has privacy, as opposed to the unit that's being proposed has privacy. Is that the idea?
Yes, it's to provide privacy to not overlook. Yeah.
If you can have a 6-foot fence, what's the difference between a landscaping and a 6-foot fence?
The reality, Jim, is it's irrelevant because if you got 2 units that are 4 feet off the property lines, they're only 8 feet apart anyway. I mean, you'll be talking to each other through the windows.
I mean, one of the examples brought up was that you could have an elevated deck. So would you make the recommendation that at the height of the deck, you provide the 6 foot of landscaping, or maybe that's a potential solution to alleviate one of the concerns that I think Mr. Jones had?
You can't really
Conveyed.
put landscaping on the building though. And is the 6 foot, that's height, I assume, and not width? Maybe width makes more sense. But I don't know which way you're talking about it.
If you don't want to have.
It's 6 feet high, is that right?
It's intended to be 6 feet high, yes. But if there's feedback that, 6 foot width would be helpful as well, we can be open to
Because
that.
Kevin said that in 4 feet, you can't really do any landscaping. Not really.
Well, but this is saying that it's a 10-foot side yard then, if it's,
It's a 10
if
foot
it has a deck.
for the deck upstairs, but you can still have the building. You could still have the building at 4 feet and the deck though has to be set back to
Yeah,
10.
maybe a better solution is just to eliminate a deck where there's a privacy concern on an adjacent property then.
I have a suggestion that, given the floodgate that this could open, that the effort be made to do a series of potential scenarios in 3D so that people can actually see what we're looking at, what is about to get passed here. It's not just written on a page, but can actually be envisioned. Something where we could be sitting here right now looking at what you're proposing is a 3D model, which should certainly be able to be done with relative ease, so that we're not just making suppositions, but looking at things as they actually might be made, might be built, what the placement of a lot suggestion would be. I mean, if you're looking at a 50 by 100 foot lot with this many residences on it, what does it look like? What is the ingress egress from a rear unit, which is where the other units are going to have to be? What does it look like on a lot vis-a-vis the neighbors and the oversight into their properties? The potential landscaping or lack of landscaping, the mix of architectural elements that you're wanting to approve in advance of ever seeing what they might look like. I think this is very, very sketchy at this point. Again, I'm not blaming anyone that's on this call this morning, but I think if you're asking for input, give us something to input on rather than words. We've got to see some things here. We operate very visually in this group. And I think the general public should be honored with that depth of commitment, at least if we're going to say these are going to get done within your community, this is what they're probably going to look like, because we will have no oversight at that point.
Well, I think the problem with, I mean, three-dimensional viewing would be great, but the problem with that is that the staff doesn't have probably the time to provide this, but this is really something for the architectural designers to try to figure out how to meet these requirements rather than having the staff propose options about how these requirements could be met.
But how does it become something that you can actually make a judgment on, that you can actually have an opinion on? You read it on a page, see it on the screen, it gives you absolutely nothing to judge other than the little drawings that were earlier on where they showed the stacked units, but not even a vague representation of what they might look like. Somewhere along the line, somebody's got to dig deep here.
I mean, I personally can visualize exactly what this is going to.
Oh, yeah, so can I.
And I have a pretty good ability to visualize three-dimensional space. So I can visualize how people are going to circumvent these rules.
Right, of course.
But the other part of this whole equation, of course, is the building code.
Right.
For instance, if you're only 4 feet off a property line, you get fire requirements.
Right.
And if you're even with ADUs, it's the windows are limited by area. And if you put the window at, I think Robert mentioned this, at 48 inches off the floor, it doesn't meet fire egress. So it would preclude having, say, a bedroom on that second floor.
My concern is that the developers that are going to be moving on this type of project, it's not going to be an individual landowner. It's going to be developers.
It'll be all investor driven.
That's right. And they are going to be doing what we see now with the developer builder remedies and all of these things.
Oh, yeah.
They are already looking for loopholes. And
This has the potential of converting single-family residential neighborhoods into slums.
That's right. Exactly.
May I provide some context real quick about who can utilize SB9? Because in order to subdivide your lot, the property owner does have to live there at least 3 years after that subdivision is approved, and they sign an affidavit to that effect. So this isn't supposed to be investor driven. It's supposed to be for homeowners. Just to provide that context, it is there are some safeguards in place to that effect.
Thanks, Shannon. And I just also want to add that these units cannot be used for short-term rentals, so cannot be rented for a minimum of 30 days. So that's also state mandated. Is it okay if we jump to the next slide?
No, hold on just a second. Hold on. I want to talk to Shannon for a second. I want to know, you said something earlier. You said that it's only in certain communities. Can you clear up the certain communities for us? Because, and here's my thought train after what people have said. You're taking the potential of single family homes in mostly what we know nowadays as tracts that people bought into thinking that they were going to have a single family home next to them. And you're allowing somebody to put multiple units on a lot that was designed and people purchased for single family homes. We already have condominiums, we have apartments, we have high-rise buildings, we have all of the other potential living elements available. We went through the whole process of allocating different areas to different kinds of space. We called that zoning. And this looks a whole lot like a zoning end run on single family units. And now you're changing the potential footprint of the zoning laws. And that's all it looks like. I mean, I'm sorry, you can put whatever color on it you want, but that's all it really is. You're circumventing the zoning laws.
I want to clarify that it's not.
And just say your intent that we don't need zoning laws anymore and let us developers go do what the hell we want. I'm sorry, but that's the end.
I think there's a misunderstanding here because this law was approved 2.5 years ago at the state level. So we've been processing projects pursuant to this law continuously. And I really, this is Karina's project. I want to empower her to answer these questions, but this already exists. We're already processing projects pursuant to this bill. And this was done at the state level. What long-range planning is doing now is at least trying to put some guardrails on what the state already allowed. So what you guys are looking at is design standards that would at least help us apply certain restrictions to what the state already allows, what we're already processing currently. And that's what long-range planning is doing with these design guidelines, doing with their draft ordinance. And I'll turn it over to Karina in case she has anything to add there.
Well, and I would just say, this is Alex, I would just say that, you know, what the state provides is, yes, you can do 2 units and they need to be a minimum of 800 square feet with 4-foot side and rear setbacks. And we can't impose any standards that would preclude the ability to do that. That said, some of these other things that are being proposed, if you find them too lenient in terms of the size of the units beyond 800 square feet or the height, you're welcome to make a recommendation that we would carry forward to the planning commission and board, that things be smaller or shorter in height. That's what we've heard from some of Montecito BR, for example, thought they should be 16 feet height limit and 800 square foot min and max. So if that's kind of where you all are coming from, then you're welcome to make those suggestions. But it's not really helpful to just criticize the state law, because that, you know, that's out of our hands.
I have a comment about the upper story enclosed, that bullet. If we go back to what I suggested before about graduated setbacks, that would help immensely. Because as you go up in height, you're farther away from the side, and the other neighbor gets light and all that sort of thing. So that would help that too. Another question I have is, how do homeowners associations figure into this? Are they moot now?
So the state doesn't have any mandate that, you know, homeowners association can prevent a SB9 project. So under state law, they would still be able to.
No, I mean, if a homeowners association says you can't do this, is that legal?
Again, back to the zoning laws, zoning ordinances. This all goes back to you're allowing people to change. Well, the state is. I'm not saying you. I'm talking about the whole ordinance. You're allowing people to circumvent the zoning ordinance, and you created these CCNRs and units. And that's why I asked Shannon and say, hey, can you help us out with what areas this actually could be implemented? You say it was only certain areas that it could be implemented. Clear that up for us so that it makes more sense. Oh, okay. Well, in those places, that does make some sense. If it's already an existing tract that has, which all of the new ones do, all have their own set of CCNRs, do the CCNRs then not apply in this particular deal for this particular bill? And so, but the rest of the CCRs still apply? Does the state have that ability? Does the state have that right? Or should this thing be challenged in court to the state, to the fact that the state doesn't have the right to change existing zoning ordinance rules and laws and override existing CCNRs?
So I can't really comment on the state's right, but Teresa, do you mind pulling up the map link that was included in the box folder, please? And then I'll just also remind you guys that these projects would only be permitted on single-family residential zone parcels. So that would be the RR zone, R1, E1, SLP, EX1, and there's a map that staff prepared to show these exact zones. And then also a reminder that, you know, these parcels would need to be considered and wholly within an urbanized area or urban cluster. So this map shows what those parcels, which parcels could qualify.
So Shannon, I know you're familiar with the lot that I live on. I could theoretically split that lot. It's almost 11,000 square foot lot. I could split that into 3 smaller lots and build 3 separate units plus 3 ADUs.
That's not accurate. You could split it into 2 in theory, if it met all of the location requirements, which Karina briefly touched upon.
Right.
But
Right.
again, Karina is capable of answering these questions, so I'm happy to fill in where she needs help, but I do want her to
Well,
be able to.
I just was
speak to
only
her.
asking because I wanted some context that I know that you're familiar with that lot. So that's
Yeah.
what I was asking. Obviously there's a house in the way, so that wouldn't be that easy to do, but I mean, it's theoretically possible though.
Theoretically possible, yeah. And then you'll note, like she mentioned, that it has to be an urban area based on the census. So like, for example, Los Alamos doesn't qualify. So that's why you don't see it here on the map.
Okay, well, that's at least helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Teresa, do you
How
mind
close
just?
to trigger a transit, how close does it have to be to a bus stop? No parking.
Quarter mile, yeah. Jim, I think it's a quarter mile.
Is it?
Yeah, pretty sure it is.
We try to get bus stops removed.
Well, that's only for the parking requirement. I mean, but you could theoretically have 0 parking requirement if you were.
Karina, did you want me to
300
pull
yards from
something up?
bus.
Just if you could zoom in just a bit to get a little closer.
So then what happens is people are going to park in that front setback.
Oh, yeah, it's horrible over by.
No, we see that already. I mean, people can already, basically build an ADU on almost on any residential lot if they want to. And
Great, thanks, Teresa. So this is just an overview of those single family zoned parcels that would be eligible for an SB9 project. And the link is provided to you guys in the box folder, so you can look at it at a later time more in
that's
detail.
almost entirely the same.
You can zoom in on each lot. It's kind of cool, the interactive.
Yeah. So just as a quick overview of what has been provided to you guys. And then Teresa, do you mind just kind of pulling up the presentation back up, please?
Shannon, can I ask you a quick question? Why are those other lots not eligible?
Karina, do you want to take that one?
That's a mobile home park, but
So the parcels that are designated and labeled yellow that you see on the map currently, these are all RR, R1, E1, EX1, SLP. The state mandates that it's a single family residential zoned parcel, and these are those eligible parcels in these zones that I just.
Teresa, go down on the picture. Okay, stop right there. I have a question for you. So on the bottom left portion of the screen, there's actually 3 distinct different communities right there in a fairly large square. And then there's yellow in the middle. Looks kind of like somebody's pointing their finger and bending their finger down to the right, sort of. So
Oak Hill, yeah.
so actually there's 3 different communities, right? To the left, there is the old Elkhorn Golf Course.
Mhm.
Then there's a portion of Oak Hill, which was an original portion of it. That's the yellow square piece of like the base of the finger. And then there's the finger. Now, why are the lots in the middle zoned in the yellow and the lots around it not?
They have different zoning.
But the zoning's the same.
It's probably
That's
because they
that's my
don't,
point. That's
uh,
zoned 1E1.
yeah, it's because it has to be both zoned for that as well as be within the census tract for being an urban area. So for some reason, those other parcels didn't fall into the census tract as an urban area.
Could you guys do a little research and give me the reason? Because I want to know why the stuff inside of that particular road loop is yellow and the part outside isn't. I don't know, because I happen to have personal knowledge of the zoning of that thing, and there's no zoning difference between any of it. The lots on the inside and the outside were all developed at the same time. So I don't understand the difference. Could you guys give us some clarity on that? Somebody give me some clarity.
I think what Alex said is accurate. There are a number of location requirements. The first is the zone. then is it in the appropriate, is it in an urban area based on the US Census maps? And as Alex said, that's why those outside parcels aren't included. And then you could have parcels shown in yellow that still don't meet the location requirements from like an environmental perspective or maybe like a flood control perspective. There's a number of things that we would review. Karina's just trying to show you, here's the absolute maximum that could potentially take advantage of this.
Mhm.
Is high fire zones considered in the equation?
They are, but they would still have their own standards that they would have to meet. But you could construct an SB9 unit. There just are some limitations.
Okay.
All right, let's jump back to the
One quick,
PowerPoint.
what's the timing on proceeding to the planning commission on this? Do we, I mean, is after today you're going to planning commission, or do we have additional time to provide better analysis from our end of the objectifiable design criteria? I
So
think
we
that-
still
Go
have a
ahead,
bit
I'm
of
sorry.
time because we do need to collect all of the feedback that we've received and solidify the standards before we go to the planning commission. So we are anticipating going to the planning commission probably by the end of the summer, potentially
Okay.
sooner. We need some time to solidify the standards.
Yeah, I mean, this is the first time we've seen any of this, so it's
Mhm.
at
That's
least from
understandable.
my personal perspective, I would like to take some time to analyze what some of these requirements how they might be implemented, because I've seen this in the past in the city of Lompoc and in other communities where a bunch of new ordinances get thrown in there and nobody really understands how they're going to be implemented until you actually try to implement them. It can be really chaotic, because then you create a situation. For instance, I had a project where it had a single family house and a 2-unit building on the backside, and the requirement was to provide bike racks for multifamily. And they considered the 2-unit in the back as a multifamily building, i.e. requiring a bike rack, where all 3 units had garages, but the single family house was not required to. So the implication there is that a person living in a single family house can figure out how to put his bike in the garage, whereas the individuals living in the duplex in the back could not figure that out. So, which was sort of a ridiculous requirement when it boiled down, although the idea originally was that for large multifamily projects, i.e., 40-unit apartments or something, would provide storage areas for bicycles. It was never considered to be, a little duplex sitting on a lot that would need a bike rack outside. So I guess what I would personally like to do is spend some time and give this some thought about how some of these things might be implemented. And then I could probably provide a little better level of input on how you might tweak this a little bit to make it more, a little more reasonable, perhaps, or a little more clear. For instance, like Jim said about the materials, maybe it's not even appropriate to list materials other than to say that they need to be compatible with the existing residences. Rather, I mean, nobody's going to build a unit out of granite, and you're not going to allow somebody to put steel siding on a house in a neighborhood, hopefully not in a neighborhood that already is, say, all stucco or all siding of some type. So anyway, I guess maybe I'm just rambling a little bit here, but I think it would be prudent to spend a little bit more time before we jump into the next level on this.
Mhm. Yeah, and I just want to remind you all that these standards do need to be objective, so we want to make them very straightforward and clear. So if there are materials that we can include, that would be helpful if you could provide some feedback.
So if you, for instance, didn't say you could use brick and somebody proposed brick, that would, or if you said you couldn't use brick, for instance, then that would be objectifiable, so you couldn't use brick? Is that kind of what you're saying?
No, not necessarily. We just want to include some materials as an option and make those very straightforward and clear that an applicant can use those materials. And then we also want to include materials that we will not be allowed, or materials that would not be allowed or essentially prohibited. And those I did mention earlier.
Okay, like for instance, if you had little metal barn in the back of your lot, it'd be okay to use it because it's metal then.
Theoretically, yes, if you're trying to be compatible with the existing materials on site or with the primary dwelling,
Okay.
that could be an option.
Okay, thank you. Gives me
I
better-
got one other comment. I appreciate the fact that you have to get the project done. But you did have 2.5 years. And sounds to me like you kind of waited till the last minute and then said, here, this is what you guys give us your input in 15 seconds. And we got to go get it all put together and turned in. You admitted that it's been 2.5 years.
I wanted to clarify, it's
You
actually only
couldn't
been
have got
1.5.
anything to anybody
1.5.
before that and had like a little bit of a think tank? Honestly?
Yeah,
I'm
appreciate-
I am going to be the devil's advocate. You guys.
No
put your
worries.
own
Yeah,
self
we
into
appreciate
that.
all the feedback. Unfortunately, timing,
Don't
yes.
have any time because we want to get it done now. So that's it. I mean, it sounds very condescending when I hear it, when my ear hears it. You know, if I did that to one of my clients, they would probably not have me be their contractor the second time. Does
Yeah,
that
so this
make
isn't
sense?
going to be just given to the planning commission to just accept. That's why we also came to all of the BARs to receive feedback from everyone that, you know, you guys are the experts for design and architectural styles. And this is an opportunity to help us create something before we take it to the
Well,
planning
I
commission.
appreciate the opportunity to provide some input here because I know that you guys have your hands tied here with the state law, but I think what Robert's kind of saying and what I think I tried to say was that we just need to take a little bit more time before we jump in the fire here with this because I can assure you that there's developers that are going to figure out ways to circumvent these rules to the maximum that they can. And because they're motivated by something other than what the neighborhood looks like. And
Mhm.
I think our job is kind of try to improve what neighborhoods look like. So that's kind of how I see this as well. So hopefully we have a couple of weeks where we can provide some perhaps written input. I'm certainly
Well,
to do
what
that.
we can do is come back at your next meeting.
That'd be great for me. I like to take some time and really kind of digest this rather than sit here for 15 minutes and try to come up with something thoughtful that we could add to this that would make it perhaps a little bit better. Anyway, so yeah, I don't even need the next meeting. I can get something to you guys in less than that, but yeah, that'd be great.
Great, thank you. And then we're just going to jump into the next slide. And I just want to remind you all that we do have the telecom ordinance standards as well that we need to go over. So just a heads up. So for open space, we are proposing private open space that shall be provided for each residential unit at a ratio of at least 300 square feet for units that have 2 or less bedrooms. And for each bedroom in excess of 2, they shall require 100 square feet per additional bedroom. And as I mentioned previously, I kind of briefly touched on this. This private open space must be directly accessible to the dwelling that it serves. It can be within the side and rear setback areas, but it cannot be in the front yard setback. That shall not be used to satisfy this open space requirement. And also balconies, patios, decks, and unenclosed porches can be used towards this open space requirement.
This is either paved or landscaped, right?
If it's, yes, it could be uncovered, paved, or landscaped patio space or open space as well, like a grassy area, for example. And then one thing to note is the minimum width of this open space area shall be at least 10 feet. And this is the last standard for Senate Bill 9. Before I jump into telecom, is there any comments on this open space requirement that we're proposing?
We talked earlier about landscape. Is there any landscape requirements that you're proposing?
Not specific. That's kind of what I mentioned earlier. We can, that is feedback that we did receive from SBAR. So it's not a standard that we've already drafted, something we would put together. But
I'm sorry, go ahead. Okay, well, go ahead. So the 300 square foot per unit only applies to the primary unit, not the ADU?
So this standard would not apply to ADUs. All ADUs that are constructed in addition to SB9, they would have to comply with the ADU standard. So those would be separate.
Okay, that's right. That was how I understood.
So the ADU standard, does that have any open space?
No.
It doesn't.
No.
Yeah.
Any other comments before we jump into telecom?
No.
No.
Great. Can we jump to the next 2 slides? Thanks, Teresa. All right, so for small wireless facility projects that would meet these proposed objective design standards, they would be exempt from design review. And these standards essentially would take place of the BAR design process. These proposed standards would apply to facilities that are mounted on structures that are 50 feet or less, located on existing or replacement utility poles, non-pole concealment structures, roof of an existing structure, or vaulted underground. Next slide. And here's just a list of the design standards I'm going to be going over. Next slide. So we're proposing that all small wireless facilities be stealth as technically feasible, with concealment elements that mimic or blend with the underlying support structure, surrounding environment, as well as adjacent uses. So for new installations, antennas, associated equipment, they shall be fully concealed within the structure. And if concealment is not compatible with a pole design, then it must appear as an integral part of the structure or mounted as close to the pole as technically feasible. Next slide. So for all cables, wires, and other connectors, they'll need to be routed through conduits within the pole and concealed from public view. Any external conduits or shrouds must be finished to match the underlying pole. Excess cables shall not be spooled, coiled, or stored on the pole's exterior. And then for pole-mounted accessory equipment, they may be installed behind street, traffic, or other signs, but they must be placed in a location that is most concealed. Next slide. So all exterior surfaces shall be painted, colored, or wrapped in flat, non-reflective hues that will match the underlying support structure, and also treated with graffiti-resistant sealant. All new poles or structures will need to replicate materials, colors, and finishes of existing infrastructure nearby. And then for all replacement poles or structures, they'll also need to be of the same material of the existing poles or adjacent poles. Next slide.
What does the middle one mean to existing infrastructure nearby? If you're putting a pole up, what are you trying to match?
So if it's a new pole, then you're just trying to match whatever is existing nearby. So if there's other
Poles.
wireless facility poles, the intent is that they match those.
Match other poles that are nearby.
Yes, for compatibility.
I don't know what you're trying to match,
Yeah,
really.
that one's a little nebulous.
The first one has some pretty bad implications also. If you're putting up a new structure and somebody wants to use the faux trees and that kind of stuff, how does that relate to matte finishes? Maybe the leaf structure, it doesn't work in a matte finish. What's the intent?
These are smaller.
These standards are for small wireless, so more the tier 2 type of facilities. So it wouldn't be for those faux mono pole
So
types.
we're not really.
Like in a
we're not
light
talking about
pole or something.
Large monopoles.
Yes, yeah. Like a light pole, for example, or
Is this thing, does it have a height limit
50
for
feet.
this one, 50 feet?
correct.
Okay.
Teresa, can we jump to the next slide? That has an example. Thank you. So here's an example of a tier 2 project where the antenna canister and shroud is being proposed to match the existing poles, materials, and colors. So it's a smaller scale type of wireless facility project.
So there, if they put up their own pole, they'd have to put up a wood pole as opposed to a metal pole. I guess. Okay.
I got one other question then. Has anybody checked with the telecommunications companies about the proximity of one antenna to the other? Do these things actually work in that tight of proximity when you have the omnilobe antennas, which is what they're showing there on the picture to the right? Do they work in that close proximity to each other? Or have you just tied their hands to the point where they can't put one up?
I don't really have the expertise just to be able to comment on that specific question. Alex or Shannon,
Well,
you guys-
I'm not sure I understood the question. Could you rephrase or restate?
Okay, so in the omnilobe antennas that you're showing on the pole in the right-hand screen,
Mhm.
you're showing two separate kinds of antennas. One, there's an antenna up on the top, and then there's an omnilobe antenna on the bottom. You're kind
No,
of hinting to the fact that there's one on each side of the pole, which would be in threes. Most all of these cell towers have tri-lobed sets of antennas. I don't know if there's any restriction on the location of those and those for individual antennas in relationship to each other. That's what I'm asking is does the pole, here's where I'm going with this. Does the pole have to be 4 or 5 feet in diameter for the antennas to be able to work? You said the pole has to look like the other poles. Is that they're going to have to put up a 4 or 5 foot diameter wooden pole to make the antennas actually function properly? Can they be in that close proximity to each other? Some of these things have frequency interference problems that they can't be so close to something else. That's why they build them on these bigger triangle bases in the trees and stuff. They need to have some separation from each other. Now, I don't know if there's other ways to combat that, other ways to cancel out the frequency interference, but what I was asking was, have you tied their hands by saying, hey, look, you can have a 12-inch diameter pole, you can put your antenna on it, but they say, well, what the technology doesn't support that, we can't manage that, so we have to go to a different tiered system to be able to have coverage. And the intent obviously is to get cell coverage to the fringe areas. Has
Okay,
anybody
so,
looked into that technology restraints?
yeah, so first off, this picture is showing the antenna is the canister on top. What's lower down is the accessory equipment serving that antenna. So those aren't two separate antennas. And this technology for what is referred to as small cell wireless facilities, those are small in scale, and they are, typically, I think the size limit is, what is it, Shannon, 3 cubic feet in volume to comply or to meet a small cell wireless facility standard. So we're not talking about and regulating those
So these are
multi-prong
small
antennas that
repeaters.
where you would normally have to develop those are normally considered like a macro tower, or you have to build a larger support structure to support them.
So
That's
these
a
are like
different
small-scale
technology,
repeaters?
different type of antenna. So no, we're not tying anyone into a corner with these regulations.
You see them at signals all the time now that they're putting in. They're just a larger diameter. Nobody knows they're there.
Teresa, can we jump to the next slide, please? Thank you. So in regards to shrouding for all antennas and associated equipment, they shall be installed within a single shroud or radome if feasible. Pole top antenna shall be visually consistent with the design, color, and scale of the underlying pole, as well as not exceed 2.5 times the median pole. For side arm antennas, the shroud must cover the cross arm and any equipment between the vertical riser and antenna.
Is the 2.5 times the diameter?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
Can we jump to the next slide, please? Thank you. So figure 1 is an example of an antenna concealed within a single shroud with a tapered cable shroud between the antenna and pole top. Figure 2 is a pole top antenna on a wood utility pole.
And both of those would be complying?
Yes.
Okay.
Can we jump to the next slide, please?
Most people are never going to notice it.
So for horizontal extension, side mountain antennas are prohibited unless they are infeasible. They shall be placed as close to support structure as technically feasible, and they may not extend more than 24 inches over any roadway or abutting private property. And then for pole-mounted accessory equipment, they shall be flush with the pole and not exceed over any roadway or abutting private property as well. Next slide. And here's an example, figure 3, shrouded side mounted antenna on wood pole with horizontal separation. Figure 4 is a pole mounted accessory equipment shroud on wood utility pole.
And again,
Next
these are both compliant?
Yes.
Okay.
So all accessory equipment shall be placed underground in a underground utility district or in a location where the director determines above ground accessory equipment would restrict the public's rights of way. Equipment shall be installed in a load rated vault with a slip resistant cover if beneath the sidewalk, and airflow vents shall be flush to grade and may not exceed 2 feet above grade. Can we jump to the next slide, please? And here's an example of the flush to grade underground equipment vault. Next slide. And finally, the minimum ground clearance for accessory equipment shall be at least 10 feet above ground level. For orientation, unless they're behind a street sign or concealment that dictates the equipment orientation on the pole, then all pole-mounted accessory equipment shall be in line with the adjacent road or oriented away from the adjacent road when concealed by landscaping or any existing vegetation. Next slide. And that wraps up the telecom objective design standards. Do we have any questions or comments or feedback?
We generally don't see once they're 50, the tier 2 here, right? I don't think I ever recall seeing one.
I don't believe we ever have either. With what you're proposing here doesn't seem unreasonable to me.
No, it seems fine.
Yeah, I would say most tier 2 are in the 35 foot range because they're, mounted on existing utility poles, which are usually in the 30 to 35 foot range.
Yeah, this doesn't seem unreasonable at all. And the vaults that's kind of been consistent with what's electrical vaults for years have been that way. So.
Mm-hmm. And I just also want to remind you all that these standards, we did look at the city of Santa Barbara's and uses their standards as an example for ours.
No, I don't have any comment. I think they're fine personally.
Great. Do we have any last comments or suggestions for Senate Bill 9? And then do we need to come back at the next meeting?
I still have a general question about the Senate bill. Are about CC&Rs. Are they valid anymore? Are they moot because of this? If somebody has a house on a lot that has CC&Rs attached to it, do those no longer exist if, say, it restricts how many houses you can put on it? Do you know?
It is my understanding that there would be no restriction, but I can confirm.
I can add to that, Karina, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the county doesn't actually enforce CC&Rs. Like they're a private agreement that the county is not a party to. So there are times when people come in with proposals that conflict with their CC&Rs. We let them know that they should consult with their HOA, but we don't uphold the enforcement of those. I think what we've seen, this has come up with ADUs
Mhm.
on properties where they're in HOAs and have CCNRs to this effect. And I believe that, not an attorney and I don't follow case law, tremendously closely, but I believe that a HOA can't keep a project or a property from doing an ADU as long as they comply with the state requirements. And so I imagine it would be a similar logic applied to the SB9 units. But again, the county wouldn't be a party to that enforcement of the CCNRs.
Well, the HOAs have to use civil means, they have to sue them to enforce their laws. So I wonder if anybody's, well, thank you. That's my question.
For a long time, Shannon, I think that on submittal to the county, I think it required the HOA compliance, or not that you guys had to verify that, but they had to provide a letter that they had run it through the HOA and had approval from the HOA, because sometimes the HOA requirements are more restrictive than what the state or the county is. I've had a couple projects where the height limit was only 12 feet. And it was very difficult to meet that 12 feet and provide what the owner wanted for his RV garage, for instance. So I think, and the only thing I had to do at that point was just provide a letter, and there was a lawsuit between the owner and the ADU or the HOA. And they came to a resolution, and we just had to provide the documentation upon submittal that it was in compliance, sort of like a canon will serve letter type of thing. So that's not something that you guys would normally enforce on a HOA.
Yeah, we don't enforce it. And I'm not familiar with that being a submittal requirement, but Alex would have probably more background on the history of.
I have another question. I'm going through my notes. When you put multiple units on a lot, are there any location requirements, primary, secondary? Does the primary house have to be in front of the ADU? It doesn't make any difference. Is there any kind of thought about that?
There is no mandate. Oh, Alex, you wanted to take that?
Well, I was just going to say, so we're not touching the ADU regulations. Generally, ADUs, with some exceptions, have to meet front setbacks unless that would preclude the ability to construct an ADU. So normally you see ADUs in the back, but you can also see them stacked on top of a garage. That's a common situation, or the garage conversion like we talked about previously. With the two primary dwelling units, since they still have to comply with front setbacks, I think normally what you'd see is the second unit either stacked, attached to the primary dwelling or placed behind it. I don't know that you would be able to place it in front of it, unless your residence was already pretty far back on the lot.
There's nothing written about where they have to be on the lot.
No, just it would be driven by the setback requirements.
And this is a silly question, but how do house numbers work? Do they usually get like the same number in A, B, and C, D, or what?
Or a half. I've seen halves. Or A, B. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you had
I've
two
seen half
primary
as well.
units on the same lot,
ABs.
you had 4 units on the same lot, it could go through the same water meter, right?
I think that for the primary dwellings, they have separate water meters, but for the ADUs, they don't need separate meters.
Correct.
So each one would have to have its own meter, which would have to be purchased. Okay.
So there are, and that's why I say there are a lot of barriers to SB9, and which is why we've probably not seen that many so far, even though the law has been in effect for some time. And I think we will continue to see more ADUs than we do SB9 projects.
Yeah, there are other concerns. For instance, if you're doing an ADU on a house that doesn't have fire sprinklers, you don't have to put fire sprinklers in the ADU. But if you were creating second dwelling unit on that same lot, or subsequently a new lot, you'd be forced to put in those fire sprinklers, which would then translate into the ADU. If you built an associated ADU with that, it would be required to have fire sprinklers. And another example is the garage. If you built over the garage, that's great, except those setback requirements then defer back because they're not exempted out like the ADU setback requirements. I recently did a project up in San Luis, and we had to meet the 10-foot setbacks even for an ADU above a garage.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the same as if we just built it on the ground. We could have been at, I think it's minimum of 3 feet or 4 feet from the side yards and the rear yard. So there is still some restrictions on some of that stuff. But if they waive away any parking requirement for second dwellings, that's where the rub will really be, because you can theoretically have 2 single-family residences and 2 ADUs with no parking requirement whatsoever. And it's completely unrealistic, even if there is a transit stop 100 yards away.
That could be 10 cars.
Yeah, because most people aren't going to, do all their transportation needs through the transit. It's not even that effective in this area, so.
2 adults, 2 kids, 4 cars plus work vehicles.
Yeah, it could be dramatic, but the only question I had is it possible to get a copy of your presentation here so I could at least do some independent analysis of it and provide some
This was on.
thoughts? It is online?
It's on Box, and I could forward you the email if you'd like.
Yes.
Oh, that'd be great. That'd be perfect. I prefer that. Thank you.
So just to wrap up, would people rather look at it individually and send comments through Teresa, or would you like us to come back in a month and?
I need individual comments, and I like the other one too, I guess.
Yeah, but I think both, if it's
Build and suspense.
acceptable to you guys.
Okay, sure.
And I just want to provide some clarification on the HOA. So it looks like Senate Bill 9 is silent and does not provide some type of exception to HOAs. So
Hey, Shannon.
Okay.
In the past, I've been involved in certain projects where the county won't approve the project in a community that has an HOA until they have a letter from the HOA that said that it met the HOA's design standards. So you said the county doesn't enforce them, but that's an enforcement vehicle, no?
Well, no.
The county doesn't enforce private agreements.
Yeah, I've had that exact situation where I had to provide a letter from the HOA that they agreed with it. Not the county wasn't going to go verify what the HOA requirements were. Just they took the HOA's word that it was acceptable.
Right, but the projects, they say they're not enforcing, but they won't give you the permit for your project until they have a letter that it agrees with the HOA's intent.
That was my experience.
Yeah, but that's an enforcement.
Indirectly.
Yeah,
It's
I'm
like-
not- I mean-
providing a Cannon will serve letter for water.
Exactly. I mean, you can't get your permit, so you can't start. You
It sounds like this is a question outside of the scope of what Karina
Yeah.
and Alex are
Well, I
presenting,
just
but you're
wondered- no, it
welcome to
actually has some
submit a
tiebacks to the
question in
HOA.
writing and we will review that.
right?
So
If you
Doesn't give
email
them the okay to build
Teresa with your
the second
questions, we
unit
can.
Because it's not allowed in there, then the county basically is enforcing the HOA against the state law.
We've approved a
I'm
lot of
looking at such an
ADUs and other
overbought-
units and properties that are within HOAs. So that's not been an issue. So we're happy to review any questions you may have if you send them through Teresa in writing, but I think it's not an agendized item, so.
All right, thank you. We'll look forward to seeing you at the next meeting then, and we'll write out a few comments of our own, and hopefully they're taken in goodwill.
all right, sounds great. Thank you all for your feedback.
Thank you.
And we look forward to meeting with you guys again.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a big ugly here. And it sounds like who is the ultimate authority here? I mean, if this is all being driven by the state, would state law?
Is the item closed or is there still discussion on it?
I think we're discussing internally.
Yes.
No, I hear you. What it looks like to me is that the biggest, you know, if the lot size is big enough and somebody can fit a secondary unit on it or an ADU, a standalone ADU, then, you know, these probably aren't going to be an issue for anybody. But what I'm sitting here thinking about is what happens, two things. A, in HOA communities where somebody's bought into, and most HOA communities are more in the higher end district, they're not in the lower end district. And even then, some ADUs could be caretakers' houses, different things like that. Whether other ways we built in units could be acceptable, but you could possibly, the state could be basically allowing for a different zoning of a project that people bought into based on the zoning. And then, of course,
Yeah.
the feasibility of actually being able to create a second unit on some of these small lots, I just don't see how they're going to be able to do it. As far as the ADUs or garage conversions, I understood that pretty simply. They just don't want to leave a garage door. They want to fill it in so it looks like the house. But all over the city of Santa Maria, people are converting their garages into these little, what we call junior ADUs, so that they can have like a little studio apartment basically, or one bedroom apartment in the garages, and then rent them out for income. And I don't agree with the whole idea of it, but that's what they're doing. And they're doing it in the city of Santa Maria and within the city zoning, you know, they've allowed it ever since these things came along, both SB 9 and SB 10. But I can see some legal problems with some of the HOAs, because if the HOA strictly doesn't allow for it, and yet the SB 9 says that you can't disallow it, they've just changed the whole idea of what that particular community was all about.
That's why my question about what supersedes.
See,
And if it's state that supersedes, then all bets are off.
well, not necessarily. It just means that somebody's got to challenge it.
Right.
And
Which
it
I
may
believe
be that
has happened with ADUs and the HOAs lost.
the HOA's lost, then they,
It's going to take precedence. It always does. The HOA is just a legal document that can be amended.
well, that's all the state law is. They just amended it to something different.
They're not gonna, I've seen these things happen, where the state law says you can do this and the ADU, HOA says you can't. The HOA has to change.
In an HOA, it requires everybody to have goodwill.
Yeah.
In the community. Otherwise, you're in lawsuits and nobody does it and it just all goes to.
And most of those
Here's
HOAs
the
don't
same.
want to go to court because it costs them all a bunch of money.
Right. Well, I understand that, yeah, but it
And
just,
that's the exact situation.
Well, there are still HOAs that have racial requirements left over in their CCNRs. So, I mean, laws change, obviously. But it, you know, is this that this isn't an agendized item? So are we, is the meeting, are you going to make a motion to close the meeting and then continue?
we can't discuss with a closed meeting. That's against the rules. We either have, we have a quorum, we can't discuss without, after we close the meeting. So,
Well, I think what we
we
gotta
were
do here is-
discussing internally some of this stuff, so that's just.
I mean, the HOA is not an issue really that's germane to this particular discussion then. I mean, it may be an issue, but it's not an issue for us.
All right,
'Cause
no,
we
no,
don't
it doesn't look
enforce
like,
the
it doesn't look like
HOA
we're
either.
gonna, yeah, well, it doesn't look like any of this thing's gonna be an issue to us if they pass it anyway. We're not gonna have any oversight.
Well,
The HOAs that are like large ones like Elkhorn, and the houses are too big to have 2 units on it anyway.
Yeah.
Generally.
yeah,
Well, there's room on the lots to put other houses.
there's room maybe to
But
put
you could
an
put
ADU,
An
but
ADU and
yeah.
a J probably attached.
But-
And I think we should just reiterate what Karina and Alex conveyed. This law applies no matter what. People are already utilizing it. This is adding to what the county can restrict. So it's all that's germane to what they're presenting is what can the county apply in addition to what the state already requires.
So
It's like what we did with ADU laws. Like, yes, we have to allow ADUs. If we don't have any ordinance in effect, we default to what the state applies. But if we pass an ordinance, there are some things we can regulate, which is, it's the same principle here.
So hypothetically, let's say that this goes to the board and they approve the submittal as you guys have it now. Who will ultimately be the reviewer enforcement agency of those architectural elements? Would that come back to this board, or will it just be a staff level decision, or?
They already have to be good question. They already have to be processed ministerially. So they can't go to, for the same reasons ADUs or like SB 35 or AB 2162 projects can't go to your board. Because you make, objective findings, or sorry, subjective findings.
Right.
Similar reasoning applies here. They even now, they don't come to you. Like, we're processing current ones that do not come to you.
Right,
So they're
but
just asking for feedback.
But wouldn't these be considered to be, I mean, the whole idea here was to create objectifiable requirements per se, right?
Right.
Not restrictive necessarily, but just something that can be said, well, yes or no, you meet or you don't meet this requirement, right?
Correct.
So that would just be done at staff level then in the future?
Yeah, and that's exactly what we do for, let's say we have 100% affordable project that qualifies for a ministerial path through SB 35. Staff looks at those existing multifamily objective standards and applies them. And then we have the opportunity, like I discussed in the last meeting when I made that presentation, for clarification. We can meet with the chair and ask for, some feedback if we have questions about particular standards. And this would be similar in that, staff would be responsible for reviewing consistency with those objective standards.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mhm.
I move we close the meeting.
Do we have a motion to close the meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Third.
All in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful weekend. Have a happy Fourth.
Yeah. Thank you to staff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you, Shannon.
Teresa.